Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Theresa May has welcomed Emmanuel Macron on his first official visit to Britain since becoming French president. The Prime Minister is understood to have agreed to spend an extra £44 million on improving border security at French ports and to take in more migrants from Calais. The talks are expected to underline the leaders' commitment to working closely together after Brexit, as our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar reports.
Nothing like a bit of pomp and ceremony to get a big meeting started. Monsieur Macron and Mrs May won't be EU partners much longer, so now they're keener than ever to keep in step where they can. To stay in tune. France is a key ally. Brexit's coming and the Prime Minister's treading a delicate line. Cooperation now, always hoping friendship pays off in future. At least French goodwill's on Theresa May's wish list. The President came to this Sandhurst summit to talk business about military collaboration and border cooperation. He wanted more cash for border control. He went to a migrant centre near Calais this week, and now he's getting £44 million to help with security, fences, closed-circuit cameras. It's helped ease tension. Border control's been a sore point. Boris Johnson and a troop of cabinet colleagues mingled with French counterparts. The two countries are the EU's biggest military powers, and today they promised British helicopters to help French troops fighting jihadists in West Africa. So though the deals and agreements being struck and signed here are important, this summit matters more than just the sum of its parts. France will be crucial to Britain's chances of getting a good Brexit deal, including on trade. And the France-UK relationship will also be important in determining Britain's clout as a global player after Brexit.
President, Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. On the count of three, a little bit of a smile, please.
To look at the leaders and their top teams beaming on cue, you'd never know the two countries have been Europe's biggest rivals and closest neighbours for time out of mind. They still are, but it suits both sides to get on well. Mrs May is certainly hoping they will. Well, the leaders' news conference is running late here, but both sides seem to have done what they can to make it all go smoothly. Soon we'll be able to see the Bayeux Tapestry without even crossing the Channel. Emmanuel Macron can call himself now the European leaders' most strong and stable leader. And the relationship with France, well, it matters more now than it has at any time, arguably, since Britain joined the old European Common Market 45 years ago. Sophie, we can expect a lot more high-energy diplomacy in the weeks and months and years ahead.
John Pienaar, thank you.
As President Macron said just a few minutes ago, Theresa May and I are weaving a new tapestry together. It is very possible that such emollient words have never been uttered before at the Sandhurst Military Academy, where the two leaders, their ministers and senior generals met this afternoon. It was Emmanuel Macron's first visit to Britain as president, and the government welcomed him with an announcement that it'll spend an extra £44.5 million improving border security around the English Channel. The visit also included a pub lunch with the PM and a top-secret briefing from all the British and French intelligence agencies. As our political editor, Gary Gibbon, now reports.
The French president was welcomed to Sandhurst Military Academy with a display of pomp. But President Macron needs no lessons on how to project power. He extracted another £44 million from Theresa May before arrival. Money to be spent in Calais, keeping migrants trying to get to Britain on the other side of the Channel. Some said it was a sign that Britain's on the back foot, needing France's help over Brexit. No, they insisted, it's a good deal for both sides.
What we are doing is working with the French authorities and providing support to ensure that we enhance the security of our border. This is in our national interests. I think it's also in the interests of France to ensure that we have as secure a border as possible at Calais and other ports.
coopératif sur ce sujet.
We do have a joint border, and unless we cooperate, we cannot manage the border. And then we will not only lead to a humanitarian disaster, but also we will end up with a situation which will not be good for on either side.
Earlier, President Macron tweeted out footage of the two leaders slipping in the back door of the Royal Oak pub in Theresa May's constituency. The two leaders pledged themselves to deepen cooperation on military and security threats. And Britain's now promised 3 Chinook helicopters to support French forces tackling Islamist extremists in Mali. Back at Sandhurst, some of the senior cabinet ministers who are arguing over what post-Brexit relationship Britain wants with the EU. When once they thought Chancellor Merkel alone would decide Brexit terms, now they talk of their guest of honour as the new power, the unexpected arrival on the European scene, assertive, and as one cabinet minister put it, intent on squeezing us.
There has been a shift in those in Britain who thought that the answer to the question of Brexit was to find out what Mrs Merkel was minded to support and sort that out. They're going to have to recalculate.
Because President Macron is probably the big player now.
That's certainly how it feels. If you go to Brussels at the moment, it's his name that is on the lips of everyone.
Why don't you want to include financial services in a future trade agreement between the UK and the EU? Is it because you want to punish Britain? Is it because you want British jobs or jobs in the City of London to come to Paris? Or do you think, as the Foreign Secretary once put it, that Britain wants to have its cake and eat it?
If you want access to the single market, including the financial services, be my guest. But it means that you need to contribute to the budget and acknowledge the jurisdiction, the European jurisdiction. Such are the rules. We know this is a system already in place for Norway. If you want a trade access, it can cover everything, but then it's not full access to the single market and to the financial services.
A group photo for the French and British ministerial teams meeting at Sandhurst. Theresa May promised to speed up the processing of applications from child migrants in Calais. She refused to demand for cash for the community there who complained they're suffering protecting Britain's border. Resisting France's demands on Brexit will be much tougher. A very different encounter.
And the last one, big smiles on 3. 1, 2 and 3. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and Jean-Paul Mulot, who represents the regional government overseeing Calais. I started by asking Tom Tugendhat if the £44 million that Britain had pledged to beef up security in Calais was too much money, as some members of his party had suggested today.
We've got to pay for security of our country. I mean, it's one of the essential duties of government. And actually, the choice is whether we put that 44 million on the border in the UK or whether we push it a little bit further out into Calais. And frankly, it's always better to have your frontier a little bit further away than where you actually need it. So that it be in Calais, is, as far as I can see, is a very good idea.
It's a bit of a luxury, isn't it? I mean,
well, it's a huge luxury.
And an anomaly, one could say.
Well, and it's a fantastic deal, not actually just for us. It's very good for us because it means we can deal with any issues on foreign soil. But actually, it's a good deal for the French too, because what it does is it dissuades migrants from seeking to come all the way to the UK because they know they're not going to get past France. So actually, it works both for both countries.
Okay. Well, let's put that to you then. I mean, you've got the British border on the French side. I've just been to Calais. It looks like a prison. These incredibly high walls and fences everywhere. The locals are very unhappy with it. Macron, the president of France, pledged last year when he was running for election that he would renegotiate the 2K treaty, which he hasn't done, as he said he wouldn't do. Are you happy with the fact that you've got our border on your soil?
We do, because, I mean, the Channel route is a 200 billion pounds trade route. So for logistics, in the northern France, but not just northern France, for Belgium, for other countries around, is super important. Then I'm talking also about the tourists. Our first clients in northern France, but also in other parts, in Dordogne and Bordeaux, are British. We want them to be happy and to be able to cross the border easily. So really, to do it together is the best solution. I know it's difficult for the people in Calais, But we hope that actually now, with more funding, we are going to be in a better shape, locally. And I don't see why, we shouldn't continue doing it. And when Macron actually said that he would, change it.
But whose responsibility is it? Because there are some British members of Parliament, including from Tom Tugendhat's party, who are saying actually it's the French responsibility. And then, many French politicians over in France are saying actually, it's your responsibility in Britain because we're preventing these people from coming to your island.
Yeah, but I think a border, obviously, like anything, you've got two sides. The best for border is always to be doing it together. It's not just about this border, Otherwise, at the moment, we've got cooperation locally in between border force, and the French PAF. They are working together, and that's the best way actually to tackle, illegal immigration and terrorists as well. So.
Tom Tugendhat, I mean, President Macron, who is very good with the great, the big diplomatic gesture. Here he is offering us the bio-tapestry, first time in 975 years. Yet another grand diplomatic gesture from him. But essentially, he's sort of got everything that he's wanted out of us, hasn't he?
Well, he's getting cooperation from one of his closest allies, but so are we. I mean, look, let's not forget, having your border on foreign soil is a hell of a luxury, and it's extremely important for us to make sure that the passage of trade, not just from France, but from the whole of the European Union, moves smoothly. And that's actually one of the things we get by being able to have that border there. But we're also getting enormous amounts of leverage. Our shared military cooperation extends our range. I mean, we're still by a considerable margin the largest investors in defence in Europe, but we're getting a hell of a lot out of that. And we're going to get a lot out of other things too. I mean, this is a negotiation. It's hardly surprising that we see, and quite understandably the French have played a blinder on this, we see the French position all over the newspapers this morning. But the reality is we've got to wait and see what the actual outcome is.
But at the end of the day, Emmanuel Macron wants something fundamentally different to Theresa May, because he wants a closer European Union, I mean, even a federated Europe. That's what he's really gunning for, and we don't want that. We're out. Well, so ultimately, our powers will diverge quite dramatically.
Well, actually, funnily enough, we're now actually on a similar path. We don't really mind what he does with the European Union. That's up to him now. What we mind is that we are able to trade cooperatively and helpfully with the European Union and indeed with the rest of the world. So actually, he has a common interest with us now, and that is to make sure that his nearest neighbour is prosperous and trades well and buys French goods and sends over wealthy tourists and all the things that are important to make sure France remains a prosperous country. So actually, he has a shared interest with us, and that shared interest means that he should, and I hope he will, see that British economic cooperation with the European Union and with France, of course, is furthered and indeed increased.
Jean-Paul Muller, should we trust President Macron? After all, he might also want some of, he's a former banker, worked for Rothschilds in Paris. He might want some of our banking business in Paris. Should we trust him?
I mean, obviously, it's a competition. I mean, the idea, but there is no competition, is a dream. But quite often I say, for example, northern France is closer to London than to Paris. I mean, Paris is also a competitor for the northern France region. Doesn't mean that, we cannot work together. And again, it's like those bilateral agreements. France has got a major agreement on defense, and we've got this security, border and agreement, Le Touquet, which proves that we can work together. And that's outside. It's nothing to do with the EU and Brexit. Right. So it's just between us.
But just briefly and very finally, Brexit is not good for your region, is it?
No, it's definitely not good. That's why we keep saying, and to the businesses in the region, please do go and invest in the UK, because we need actually the UK to do well if you want also, business to be developing on our side.
Okay, Jean-Paul Muller and Tom Tugendhat, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
There was no sign of a rolled-up Bayeux tapestry, which is technically an embroidery, under Emmanuel Macron's arm when he arrived for his first UK presidential visit, but it was a sweetener, if a rather strange one given the tapestry's subject matter. But the real give, at least initially, seems to be on our side. 44 million for better border security at Calais in return for UK checks on their side of the Channel. The mood music between the two countries ahead of Brexit may be positive, but the message from the visit of the French president is that he is now the main player in the EU. Theresa May kicked off the press conference with a gesture in a second language.
Président Macron, je suis très heureuse de vous accueillir aujourd'hui pour votre première visite au Royaume-Uni en tant que président.
So what did we learn from the May-Macron joint press conference? Our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, and our political editor, Nick Watt, are here, and they have both picked a highlight. What did you think was the whole mood music?
Well, obviously there you had Theresa May welcoming Emmanuel Macron, reaching out to him in sort of a French that is more reminiscent of Ted Heath than Tony Blair. And this was really, as you were saying, a gesture to revive the entente cordiale. And the reason for that is that Theresa May wants to show that whilst the UK is leaving the EU, it is not leaving Europe. Well, this was the response.
I want to make sure that the single market is preserved, because that's very much at the heart of the European Union. So the choice is on the British side, not on my side, but there can be no differentiated access to the financial services. If you want access to the single market, including the financial services, be my guest. But it means that you need to contribute to the budget and acknowledge the jurisdiction, the European jurisdiction.
Well, that was the absolutely fundamentalist EU position on access to the for the financial services to the single market after Brexit. As the President said, be my guest. You can have access if you observe the rules, which means paying into the budget and accepting the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. If you cannot accept that, he's saying, then you're looking at a deal along the lines of Canada, and with Canada there is no access for services. Important to say, Theresa May did say at that press conference she is confident that the UK will be able to get a deal. She's been calling it a bespoke deal, not an off-the-shelf deal that will cover both goods and services.
Now, of course, Macron was obviously very well aware of his audience behind him in the rest of the EU. From your point of view as diplomatic editor, what was the most important thing?
Well, I mean, there were some wins here for the Brits. I mean, everybody expected, for example, in the run-up to Brexit, that security cooperation is a natural for the UK and France, and we got some more details on that in Mali, Estonia, all that kind of stuff. But remember also that people were saying, if Britain votes for Brexit, you can forget having the border at Calais. It'll be moved to Dover and all the problems associated with it. And a French reporter pointed out to the French president that he was one of those people. He said, you know, you were saying the border would move, so why have you changed your mind and signed this treaty today, extending it, putting more money into it, and effectively investing in the future of the Calais border? Well, he gave some predictable, I suppose you could say, reasons about the humanitarian aspects of it, but listen closely to what he goes on to say in this clip.
Je pense que ce traité va nous permettre de changer en profondeur les choses.
I think this treaty will very much enable us both to have a more human approach for these people. It will be efficient and also preserve the quality of this joint treaty. There is also the economic aspect of this treaty. Like the Prime Minister said, on both sides of the border we want to continue to develop our trade, economic contracts. There is a lot of business to be done, and we have businesses on both sides, so it's to that effect that we need a very safe border.
So some people were saying this border treaty is all about the people, and then he uses it to talk about trade and economic cooperation and his hopes for deepening economic cooperation in all sorts of areas. Now, you might just say, well, that's the sort of thing people say at summits. It doesn't cost anything. But let's be honest, we're going into now the serious trading aspects of the Brexit talks. And some people in the Commission might have preferred him not to be explicit about that.
But obviously, you know, if you're talking about Barnier and whatever, but do you think that he was actually off script and freelancing, or do you think that was very well worked out?
Well, I think what is inevitable is that when you have leader-to-leader engagements like this, they will talk about it. And this is where some people in the Foreign Office, on the British side, and in the Department for Exiting the EU as well, believe they can open up some latitude and differences between the 27 members, and why it's so important from the EU perspective. And he paid some obeisance to Barnier as well. Having said what he said, he seemed to then say, we only have one negotiator on this. So it just shows how sensitive all of that is.
So in that sense, on that reading, Nick, was that quite a win for Theresa May? I mean, and is that going to continue as more EU leaders trot over in the next year to see her?
Well, it sounds like, as far as goods are concerned, the French are up for a deal. And don't forget, there is a lot of pressure on Emmanuel Macron for the Pas-de-Calais region of France, of northern France, to get a deal on goods. And there's quite a lot of thought that you might well find that in the future negotiations, there will be an early deal on goods But on services, which is the largest part of the UK economy, that might be a rather different story.
Thanks both very much.